Hello everyone, my name is Bona Mohammed and this is my second video addressing the Canadian Prime Minister Mr. Stephen Harper and my fellow Canadians leading up to this year's federal election. There's been a lot of heated discussion around the Niqab, and so in this video I want to explain to all of you why the Niqab is 100% absolutely a part of our Canadian identity and in fact is a shining example of our beautiful, ever-evolving Canadian values. You ready? The first point I want to draw your attention to is who exactly defines what makes something Canadian and what makes something not Canadian. In other words, what makes something, according to Stephen Harper's vocabulary, barbaric as opposed to civilized? Do we just go off of what makes white Canadians comfortable in this country? Like if every single white Canadian was polled and we asked them what they thought about curry, the food curry, and if they all categorically said that they absolutely despised curry, that curry was an evil thing, would that necessarily make curry an evil, barbaric thing? Possibly. The interesting thing about Western law and public opinion is that it's not divine. Things are always changing. Public opinion is always shifting in one direction or the other. So for example, what we liked yesterday may not be what we like today, and what we like today may not be what we like tomorrow. Lest we forget that, for instance, people like Malcolm X or Gandhi, in their own time, they were considered to be terrorists by their own countries. But yet now, we look at them with such pride. And so it tells you how quickly things can actually change. Pop quiz, you ready? In what year did Canada allow women to vote in the federal election? Now, you definitely don't know the answer, but if you said around 1920, then you would be right and wrong. So although it is true that around 1920 legislation was passed that allowed women to participate in the federal election, it wasn't actually until around the 1940s that women of color, i.e. Chinese, Japanese, and Indian women were allowed to vote in the federal election. And yet even further than that, it wasn't until around 1960 when Aboriginal women in this country were given the right to vote in the federal election. So just around 50 years ago, all women in this country were given the right to vote in the federal election, which may sound very strange considering how we as Canada view ourselves and our history, especially considering we are such champions of human rights. And I'm sure that if we went back into the racist and sexist vaults of history, we would see a lot of the same language and rhetoric that was used to discriminate against these women, especially women of color, and why they couldn't participate in the election. Women of color were perceived to be barbaric and savages. They didn't know what was good for them. They weren't as intelligent as the rest of society, and they were reliant on the opinions of white men, the dominant society, to make up their minds for them. Now, there are a lot of similarities between the language we see that was used to justify the discrimination of women in this country not being allowed to vote in the federal election and the language that we see Stephen Harper and the Conservatives using to discriminate against women who choose to wear the niqab on their own accord. I want to draw your attention to a syndrome that we see specifically in white and European history. It's something known as the white man's burden. It's this overbearing need for white people to police the world's moral and cultural values because inherently they feel as though they are superior to everyone else. Now, for the record, I do not hate white people, okay? I have a lot of white friends. It sounds dumb when I say it too, right? But it's that same sense of cultural superiority which allowed the European settlers in this country to dictate the future of Aboriginal people on this land. They were taught to abandon their language, their religion, their culture, all because it was thought that it was inferior to the European settlers' way of life. And in fact, they were taught, the Aboriginal people, that their way of life was considered to be barbaric and backwards. In fact, Christian fundamentalists in this country, with the support of the Canadian government and the institution of the church, systematically removed and kidnapped Aboriginal children from their homes and began the process of brainwashing them, teaching them to forget their own original languages, their cultures, and their religions, all because it was taught to them that these were again rooted in culturally backwards and barbaric roots. Now, this is not just a Canadian phenomenon. You should look at the history of any single European colonizing nation and the ideology that went behind their role in colonization. And till this day in Canada, white people have a very difficult time understanding their own sense of privilege and, more importantly, differentiating what they consider to be right or white and respecting the culture and value of people who may not necessarily agree with them. I'll give you an example, okay? Imagine I'm walking down the streets of Toronto, minding my own business, and in front of me I see a 13-year-old girl dressed in very revealing clothing. And I see this young little girl walking by, and inside my own head I feel so sorry for her because I feel as though she has been indirectly forced to dress that way. Because according to the media and public opinion, in order for this girl to be perceived as beautiful, she needs to walk a certain way, she needs to talk a certain way, she needs to think a certain way, she has to have this hair color, she has to have this eye color, she has to have this particular type of body size, because I feel that she is the product of barbaric sexual exploitation, which is rooted in a sexist, misogynistic, backwards culture. But can I ban every TV or magazine or music video that promotes this culture? Or can I force her to cover up because I feel as though indirectly she is being forced into dressing the way she's dressing? Or should I walk up to her in the mall and throw a blanket over her face in order to liberate her from the chains and gaze of unwanted men? No, because it's not my right to dictate how she dresses or lives her life, because her rights are protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And now here you have Muslim women who are dressing in such a way that goes against the norms, the cultural norms of the white establishment in this country, and these people can't take it. Because they are dressing in such a way that is a direct political statement that they have control over their bodies and they are free to do with it as they choose. But if a woman is wearing niqab and she is stopped by police, she has no problem removing her veil so that you can confirm her identity, just like we do at airports or any kind of security checkpoint. And if they are doing this to please anyone other than God, then there's no reward in it for them anyways. And if you truly feel that they are being forced into wearing the niqab or the hijab, then why not help facilitate their Canadian citizenship so that they can stand up against this supposed oppression they're facing at home? And then you have these cowards who run up to these Muslim women in public, on the streets, in the malls, and start shouting at them, start physically harassing them, all in the name of their liberation, right? And there have been attempts in the past, and I will not be surprised that if Harper wins this election, he will make it his goal to ban the hijab and the niqab everywhere, because he's just that kind of bigot. But isn't that the point of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Isn't it meant to defend the individual rights of people, even though personally we may not agree with them? And nobody's asking non-Muslim women to start wearing the niqab or wearing the hijab or enforcing anything upon them. All we're simply asking is that you respect our rights to interpret our faith and our religion the way we want to, and not dictate to us how we're supposed to act according to your own white culture and values. Because Canadian values are actually based upon laws that include the freedom of belief, the freedom of expression, and the freedom of religion. And a woman who chooses to wear the hijab or the niqab in this country is absolutely a direct expression of those freedoms, because we all have the right to do with our bodies as we see fit, and it is not the right of Mr. Harper or his conservatives or anyone else in this country to question and take away those freedoms from us. And for the record, Mr. Harper, the vast majority of Canadians in this country have nothing to do with your fear-mongering and your hate-driven politics, because we as Muslim Canadians know that Canadian people are amongst the best people on earth, and your bigotry will not allow us to think otherwise. And who knows, Mr. Harper, perhaps in 50 years' time, we will have the first Niqabi Prime Minister of Canada.
Creeping Sharia.
So for all my sisters out there wearing hijab or niqab, do your thing, girl, and don't let anybody try and hold you down, because you are a direct expression of the multicultural landscape that we call home. And in many ways, you are paving the road for a better Canada. And so on behalf of all Canadians, we say thank you.